Hello. Excellent. Awesome. So Emily Deane, Dr. Deane is about to join us, and we're going to talk about call today.
Hi.
Hey, Emily, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. How is everything in Vancouver?
It's awesome, actually. It's nice and sunny still, so it's still working out for us. We got a good crew here joining us. So, first of all, this is obviously, you guys all know Dr. Deane. She is an otolaryngologist, or otherwise known as ENT surgeon. Is that
That's right.
correct?
Right.
Yeah,
You
so
got it.
you did your residency training here at the University of British Columbia, which is where I did some of mine and where we work.
Mhm.
And we crossed paths when we worked at the same hospital at St. Paul's Hospital, which is downtown Vancouver. But you are now a fellow at the University of Pennsylvania, which is very impressive, in facial and reconstructive surgery. And hopefully doing a lot less call than you were back in the day.
Well,
So
you're
that,
actually you're actually catching me on my first day after 7 days straight of call. So
oh
if
man.
I look sleepy, I am.
So
It
this
was
actually might be the perfect time
yeah,
to talk about call.
it was a really busy week. And I'm happy to be on the other side of it.
No, absolutely. I think we all know that feeling, which is kind of why we're here talking about it, right? To hopefully get some tips and tricks from someone like yourself who literally just lived it in what I can only assume is an incredibly busy specialty on call. I can only think of like emergent airways and things of that nature. So we'll probably get to that. But yeah, so I mean, for most people, we know what call is, right? So call is when you're the person who's responsible for the hospital, your service, the entire hospital, all night, 24 hours, sometimes even more. So it can be incredibly daunting because you're dealing with every emergency, for example, on the ortho ward or on the, ENT ward. And sometimes they're emergent. Sometimes they're very, very life threatening in some of your cases. So that doesn't ever go away because unfortunately that's something that is going to be there with us, whether you're a trainee, a medical student, resident, and even an attending, like you and I are living now. You just came off 7 days of it, which is crazy. So tell us a little bit about what your call was like as an ENT surgeon.
So during residency, the way that UBC organized the call pool was to divide the um, call up between junior residents. Juniors would include first and second year residents who would be on call with a backup senior. So fourth and fifth year would back us up. And then as soon as you made it to R3, then you were just solo and you're kind of plugging away on your own. When I started residency, we were definitely doing a bit more call. We were about 1 in 3. And I think eventually by the time I graduated, we were closer to 1 in 4 nights on call. And what was kind of unique about ENT, because we're a small cohort of residents, there's not enough of us to cover all the hospitals that we are, working at or involved with. So we would be covering 3 hospitals, up to 3 hospitals at once on call, overnight, and or on weekends. So it was pretty busy.
That's
It
wild.
was pretty busy.
Yeah. So when what she's talking about there, so 1 in 3 just means that every third night you're on call. So imagine that every third night you are on 24-hour call shift. You're awake, sometimes all night, and so not just covering one hospital but
Mhm.
citywide. So
Yeah.
there's a couple of kinds of calls that you can do. So it sounds like you're like we did as well at Ortho. We did home call. So
Mhm.
you're allowed to kind of wait at home, and if something happens, you got to rush to your hospital, go to the emergency department, see what's happening. Or there are other ones that you have to stay in-house call, so in the hospital, because, generally speaking, those are maybe a little more busy. So things for myself, it was like when I was on my gen surge rotation, we'd have to stay in-house.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, one in call, that's busy. And so what is your craziest call night? Like, are you generally staying
Oh
up
my God.
all night, or is it just were you getting some sleep?
Well, I'm getting old enough now that the regulations have changed
Totally.
fairly dramatically for the better.
Yeah.
I can start saying back in my day.
Yeah, totally.
But when I first started, there were no restrictions on sequential numbers of call days for a junior resident, or for a resident. And, when I talk about being on attending call 7 days in a row, it's a lot. It's stressful and it's definitely, it is um, exhausting. There's no other way to put it, but I'm not on the ground pounding pavement at the
Yeah.
hospital, running around to different sites. The residents, which is where I was just 1 year ago, are really the ones that are pulling the weight. And so, yeah, when I first started residency, we could actually do 3 nights in a row or 3 days, full 24-hour shifts on call sequentially without a break. And they do say, like, there's been some studies that say that minimizing the amount of handover and minimizing the amount of changeover in terms of personnel when it comes to caring for patients in the hospital is beneficial for patient care. But I can tell you for sure, it's definitely not beneficial for the person who's, fielding all of those consults in that work. And there was one instance where I was up for 72 hours straight, and I think I had 4 hours of sleep the entire time. And there was one morning where there was an emergent airway in one hospital, and then a neck stabbing with an expanding hematoma in another
Oh
hospital.
my gosh.
And
So
I
these
was
are
alone.
life-threatening,
Yeah,
emergencies.
two simultaneous life-threatening
Oh,
problems. And I was kind of on the ground for that. But, luckily as a junior, we did have senior residents backing us up. And of course, the attending is always part of that care team. And if necessary, they'll take those things on their own. But, when you're first starting out, you kind of want to seem like you're independent and you can handle
yeah.
it. But
Oh,
sometimes you really
totally.
can't handle it.
Well, so I mean, that actually is a great segue in terms of tips on what to do when you're on call, right? And so I see a lot of new people joining. So for everyone who's just joining, so my name is Dr. Adrian Huang. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, so Scrubbed Out, and this is Dr. Emily Deane. She is an otolaryngologist, and so we're talking about not just how to survive call, which is what I did, and sounds like to a certain extent what Dr. Deane did, but how to thrive and how to conquer your call. So, for those people here, please feel free to ask questions at any time during this. This is kind of an open forum. You can just pick our brains, and we're just here to kind of talk about it in a very open way. So, in your preparation for call, I mean, did you ever have any rituals that you made sure you do? Got extra sleep, or pack your favorite bag full of favorite, necessities for life, so to speak?
Yeah, good question. I mean, residency is so busy that I do think that your opportunities to socialize are less than your average
Yeah,
human being out there in the world.
totally.
And so it was very tempting to go out the night before being on call, but that was the absolute worst
Yes.
possible idea. Just those, losing that little bit of extra sleep that you might have had if you just kind of stuck it out at home and relaxed. And whatever else it is that people do when they're out. But
Yeah, correct.
you know, that was something that I tried to avoid before being on call because it was really just painful. You're just slower. Your brain
Totally.
can't keep up with stuff. And then, yeah, I would. I I don't know. I progressively became less organized, I think, in terms of managing my personal life during residency because the volume of work just explodes. But
Absolutely.
yeah, trying to kind of keep the house organized, laundry wise, and that kind of thing, so it doesn't feel too overwhelming when you're running around and you have nothing to wear.
Well, like that's a huge point because one of the biggest things that you do not have time for as a resident, even aside from call, are things that make you feel human, right? So, for me, getting your hair cut, doing your laundry, as you mentioned, if you have a family, seeing your family on a regular basis. So I think you're right, though. I really agree. Those are really important things. And I also found it wasn't just the night before, it was 2 nights before. And I think there are some studies saying that, your brain, it's not so much even how your energy levels, not necessarily based on the night before, it was actually 2 days. So I found it really important to kind of get some sleep 2 nights in
Mhm.
advance and just kind of rest. And then maybe, have a light dinner with some friends the night before, but certainly not go out like you're saying, right?
Ill
Yeah,
advised, ill advised.
very, very ill-advised, yeah. And, did you ever have anything you would do? Like, did you prepare, food to go, little snacks along the way? Like it's like a go bag, so to speak, because you're doing home calls, so you never know when you have to pick up and run to a hospital.
Totally. It was actually the go bag that I had was more for the patient's benefit than my own. I did try to keep snacks around because you're right, that was definitely hard to come by. The saltines in the post-op area just don't really at it. But
No, that's a mistake. They dry
oh
you
yeah,
out, right? They just,
terrible.
then you're
Right.
done. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I would actually have, and I think all of our residents do, and this is pretty common in ENT because we're doing so many bedside procedures and
Right.
interventions for people on call. I have this little mountain equipment co-op like soft suitcase that I would bring around that had all my gear in it, supplies, you know, instruments that I may need at the bedside that didn't need to be sterile, and that was really handy, and I always had that around.
Yeah.
You know, when I was first starting out, I would have kind of like my my notes about common
Nice.
presentations and differentials and just kind of things to guide my you know clinical process and decision making and you know as soon as you get into the flow of it that kind of becomes unnecessary. It's really becomes on the top of your mind, but when you first start out in residency you feel like a total imposter. You
Oh, yeah.
feel that it's a miracle that someone's calling you doctor and asking you to sign things because
Oh,
you're asking them, well, is this what I should be doing? You know,
yeah.
what would you do?
Yeah, that's exactly what you do in this case. Yeah.
You know, and I actually saw some of the T9 nurses who
I saw
that's
that. They said you're
yeah,
great. Yeah, that's amazing.
they're my posse from VG, um, from Vancouver General Hospital, where you know we spend a lot of our time as ENT residents.
That's awesome.
There's kind of a black cloud over the ward in from July 1st onward, where all the new junior residents are, you know, fussing around and they don't know what they're doing.
100%. The
And then,
nurses are on high alert.
right, they're on high alert. But
Yes,
we need them, and I was so
absolutely.
grateful. Yeah, I was so grateful for all of their support and help, especially on call. You
Yeah.
know, having a team that you trust is really it's invaluable.
So that's a great segue to what you would do during your call shift. So navigating the night. So what are some strategies there? And I'm going to kick this off because Alex is a question. Alex is asking, what were your favorite procedures? I suppose on call would be reasonable question.
I mean, what's interesting about ear, nose, and throat, and I'm going to try to convince everyone that it's better than ortho, is that you know even our physical exam is a procedure. We're scoping, you know, a large majority of our patients, and once you get comfortable with scoping, that's a really it feels good to be good at it, and you know be able to see what you want to see and keep the patient comfortable. So that's a nice skill to master, and we do a lot of that on call. Um, you know, we did all kinds of stuff. Emergent airways at the Children's Hospital. You know, for foreign body aspiration, those were kind
Right.
of fun things have progressive levels of responsibility working on. And now I have my own kids, or one. My son, you can probably hear him in the background getting ready for bed. I'm on EST, so it's bedtime.
Right.
Yeah, being involved in those cases were really rewarding because families are you're there for them at the scariest time, and helping them. You know, we would be doing a lot of tracheostomy on call, whether
Right.
emergently or you know that just needed to be done outside of the usual day-to-day workload. And that's, again, it's kind of one of those procedures that as you grow up in residency, it becomes yours, and that's your own operation that eventually by the time you graduate you can do easily and independently, and you're eventually also teaching the other residents to do that. So that I really liked too.
No, that's amazing. It's and you know, you said that, you know, your ENT is better because your physical examinations are a procedure. I'm gonna wrap you. And ortho, our physical examination, it's an X-ray.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't even need to see the patient. I did have a few nights of when I was studying for the principles of surgery exam with my one of my close friends in ortho, and he was on call, and I was just listening to him deal with these cases. I was like, "You haven't even seen them. Like, how do you know?" And he
Yes,
goes,
that's right. Yeah,
"Oh,
right.
saw the X-ray. It's
That's
fine."
all we can do home call, right? So
That's
it's
right.
great. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So And you mentioned something really, really important earlier. And you were saying that as part of your go bag, you would have these notes ready for all the emergencies, especially when you're starting off, July 1st, a brand new
Hmm.
resident. And I remember when I was doing that too, my goal overnight, no matter what I was on, whether it was ICU or gen surge or ortho, it's keep the patients safe and keep the patients alive until the sun comes up, and then we have a bigger team, right? Because all the bad things always happen overnight. And
Of course.
obviously my roles, from what you're telling, were not as critical in terms of the urgent airways and things of that nature, but it was always a things that mostly medical, if I'm honest, that we don't deal with necessarily on the day to day. You would have to memorize,
Yeah.
things like hyperkalemia and
Yeah.
things of that nature.
Mhm.
And our procedures were rare and few and far between, if I'm honest, like overnight, like the emergent ones like fasciotomies or compartment syndrome and things of that nature. So
Mhm.
um, I noticed though, you're also part of I think you founded a CME group, like ENT CME, is that correct? And so is there you have anything available there for people to kind of use in terms of these kind of resources?
Um, well, that's nice of you to bring that up. So yeah, one of my mentors and now very close friend is a rhinologist and skull-based surgeon at St. Paul's, Andrew Thambu.
Oh,
You've
Andrew's
probably,
a great guy.
yeah, you've probably run
Yeah.
into him. He's wonderful,
Yeah.
and he's one of the most highly productive people I've ever met. And one of the wonderful things about Andrew is that he sees potential in people and he gives them opportunities um, to realize that potential. And so he was interested in doing a CME based project as a CME director, and we kind of batted ideas back and forth, and ultimately came up with this idea for a website where we would essentially host CME events. People could, let us know if they were hosting something via Zoom, and then we would create an event and send a notification to our followers for people to join and take
Right.
part. And it's been great. So something that is ongoing is having some of those videos online. There's nothing, but that would be a great idea if you have anyone who's interested in working on it. We don't have anything that's text based. It's all video based and kind of experts in the field
Right.
presenting in different forums. But yeah, when I was first starting, I had kind of a handbook of all the common presentations and things. And when you're first learning, sometimes you don't know the nuances
Mhm.
of those presentations and how in some circumstances some things will apply and others won't. And I still remember um, getting called about a patient who had something or an early development of something that we call Ludwig's angina. And so it's basically cellulitis of the soft tissue of the floor of the mouth. And if it becomes firm enough and infected and inflamed enough, it can result in area obstruction and it's quite dangerous. And so I remember it was my first week, I think, on call, and the nurse called me and he's like, "We think it's a Ludwig's." And I said, "Get the trach set at the bedside." And I was so gung ho about doing the safest and making sure that this patient would nothing bad would happen to them because I would be ready because I knew it was an emergency. So having those notes are very, very valuable, I think, but you slowly kind of start to get a shtick from seeing things, and so
Yes.
experiences for me has by far been the most important.
And that's also a wonderful note about, July 1st. Remember, it's okay to ask for help, right? I mean, people, you go in and, one of the biggest things you talk about imposter syndrome a little bit is, you're July 1st, you're a medical student, all of a sudden, you're a doctor, you got that title at the end of your name, right? And then you have the extra
Totally.
letters. And so people are relying on you. But remember, the difference between a fourth year medical student and a first year resident is literally one day,
Right.
right? One day.
Right.
It's the same thing as you move up the chain. Is what I always tell the residents here is, you're an R3, but you're an R2 literally one day ago, right?
Right.
So, you're allowed to ask for help, ask everybody. And something I
Mhm.
was hoping to talk about too is creating that network and community within the hospital. So,
Mhm.
get to know all the nurses, right? Talk for ortho, get to know
Right.
people that you need to know, the radiologists, your radiology colleagues who are on call, so you can run down for urgent
Mhm.
CT. get to know the emergency doctors who are going to be calling you, and get to know the anesthesiologist who you'll need to page for a consult, and the medicine doctors, right? The more people know you and can, put a face to the name. So it's not just ortho on call. It's like, oh, it's Adrian from ortho, or it's Emily from ENT, right?
Right.
That is a much better way in the hospital to get those consults, so that they're much easier to come by, I think. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I grew up more in Eastern Canada. I was born in Ottawa, and then I lived in Montreal for many years. And when we moved to Vancouver for residency, I kind of said, well, it'll be a nice change of scenery for us. We're excited to live in a new city, but we didn't really imagine ourselves being there long term. But the strength of the relationships that I formed from a professional standpoint, and I'm talking in all realms, like you said, in the emergency room, in the OR, and on the ward, in the clinic, and the front desk, like having all of those connections that were fostered over 5 years are so valuable to me that I definitely see myself moving back to Vancouver and practicing there. So maybe I'll see you around.
Absolutely, that'd be awesome. Another person put an airway for me if I need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily from ENT, you know me.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And a couple of things too. I remember, just purely logistical things, right? I mean, if you're on in-house call, I remember that if I knew I was in-house call, the first thing I would do, and I would time it, I knew exactly what time the cleaners would leave the call rooms, and I would be there at like 10 a.m., put my name on the door and say, and mark out like the best, cleanest room. This is Adrian's room. Nobody's, and just lop all my things in there, and that's my room for the night. A little bit different when you're on home call, but you're gonna do rotations anyways. And another thing is staying awake, like staying alert. Like I avoided coffee because I thought it like wired you too much. Now like 3 a.m. you're like crashing. What are your thoughts on that? Coffee or no coffee?
Oh my God, I could never survive without coffee. People that tell me they don't drink coffee, I'm very suspicious of them. I don't understand it. It's funny though. I do think that as you drink more and more coffee, you kind of don't feel the same effects as you might if you didn't drink very much. But it really doesn't affect my sleep. I need it.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That means you just you've acclimatized to the coffee.
Yeah.
You need more and more, right? Yeah,
The constant sleep deprivation just allows me to sleep at any moment.
And then the other thing I thought that was really important too. I mean, however you stay awake, what you are going to need is fuel for the night, right? Because I mean, being up and going to bed at midnight and waking up at 6 is a lot different than, like you said, staying up all night. So I always had little packets of food around with me, and so did as much as I could to kind of prep that as well. Like in your little white coat, and every pocket is like a a pen and some nuts or something.
Yeah, I think I've tried every single granola bar and energy bar that exists, for that purpose, to have something easy to pick up and put in my bag. But the nurses always knew that we were hungry. They would always feed us and bring us stuff. And if you're really suffering, you'll be able to find food. That was what my experience. But I did like having stuff in my bag. That always helped.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So everyone, so again, if I see a lot of new people joining, so this is Dr. Emily Deane. She's an otolaryngologist, currently at University of Pennsylvania, previously with University of British Columbia. My name is Dr. Adrian Huang, Scrubbedout. So we are talking about how to conquer your call shifts, not just survive, but conquer. So ask your questions if you want to. And this is like an open forum. So we just talked about some ways to prepare for your call shifts, some ways to survive the night or navigate the evening. And hopefully now, I think everyone's kind of favorite part is, what do you do when you come off call? Call's over. That's the best day ever, right? So did you have any post-call? Well, actually, I guess you said, but when you started residency, there were no rules for residents. You could be on call 72 hours at a time, which is crazy.
Which is pretty.
And when did that change? Did you get to see any of that change?
Yeah, so I think that the last time that was allowed was maybe my second or third year of residency.
Okay.
So, it did transform, and eventually I was the one making the call schedule. And so I would make sure people were not on, first of all, they weren't on more than 2 weekends a month.
Nice.
And don't forget that our responsibilities aren't only limited to on call. We're also rounding and doing that kind of thing on weekends.
Yeah,
And so, you know, we really tried to change the culture of, um, you know, residents living in the
totally.
hospital, never taking a weekend off, needing to know the patients inside and out. We still know our patients extremely well. We provide exceptional care, but we also provide self-care.
Yeah, nice.
You know, and having time. I would the times when I was hardest on my junior residents is when I would find out that they were doing things sneakily to work harder, work more, and I
Oh
was
yeah,
like, guys, you need to have your time off. So I
absolutely.
would, you know, I would really just go totally off the grid. I mean, I'm available, of course, if a junior or anyone on my team needed help or needed advice. I would always answer the phone. I wasn't one of those like I'm off, don't
Yes,
contact me type of people,
yes.
by no means. But I would definitely put time aside to have fun
Yeah, awesome.
and just be having fun. Maybe I neglected a research project or two, but you know, I think it was worth. I think it was
I
worth
know that feeling. Don't worry. Yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. You know, and one of the things for me was no matter what season was actually funny. You said you're born in Ottawa because I did my residency in Ottawa.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, so you know, it you know varies literally. There's like an 80-degree temperature swing from -40 to +40 depending on the season. But no matter
yeah,
what, I remember that my goal always was to get outside and get some fresh air, right? Because if you're stuck inside or you're just lazing around watching TV, that was the thing that would just make you feel the worst.
yeah,
And it's hard because I remember, you know, after 36 hours, you go to sleep and you wake up at, you know, 4, 5 p.m.
totally.
and you're totally discombobulated. You know, you feel nauseous, you have no idea where you are, and it just takes you a few seconds to get organized. But that's the time that you have to go out the most because if you don't, that's the way you're going to feel for the rest of the day, right? So,
Absolutely. No,
yeah,
I think there were definitely weeks where I didn't see daylight.
yeah,
You know, we would be arriving to the hospital before the sun rose and leaving after the
absolutely.
sun set,
Yeah.
and people were complaining about the weather, and I just said, "What?"
Whether you know, even the fluorescent lights in the hospital, yeah,
Yeah,
it's the same every day. Yeah, yeah.
pretty
So
much the same
we
for
have
me.
a couple of great questions. So number one from East Stairs is how do you rest while on call? So this is kind of going back a little bit to kind of navigating that evening.
Um, well, so I think one of my worst and one of my biggest regrets in residency and while being on call was when I was so tired. I was so sleep deprived. It was probably one of those 72-hour weekends. And there was something that was more urgent than I understood. And I kind of like said, oh, I can see that later. And I kind of just, you know, and I did see later, but I've never regretted more that kind of brushing off of something
Mm,
important, and delaying it till later, because I think that 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 circumstance required my attention earlier than later.
yeah.
And I know for a fact that I reacted that way because I was so tired.
Yes.
And
Your
and
body's
so
craving that rest. It's putting things off.
right. And you know, you understand you have
Mm.
kids. So you know that feeling of just you don't know what's up, what's down, what day
Oh,
is it, what time is
that's
it.
so
You know,
gross.
you're totally discombobulated.
Yeah,
And sleep deprivation really has real consequences.
totally.
And so I am very much the person that's taking a nap. You know,
Absolutely.
I put my head down. So a lot of people can't nap that easily in the middle of the day. I wouldn't say I'm the best at it, but I definitely try. And I think sometimes just getting that little lie down or that rest, whether it be in a call room, you know, maybe you feel weird about going to the call room at 10 a.m. when
Oh
you're on a
no.
12-hour or 24-hour shift, but you
Yeah.
shouldn't. You should
No,
go.
just
You
do it.
know, like
Yeah.
do it. You
Rest when
know,
you can.
get
That's a
that
great message.
rest when you
Absolutely.
can.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
yeah,
think
so I
another
think
thing too is, you know, just on that, how do you rest? You know, rest when you can, absolutely, but also avoid getting called. And the way I found you avoid getting called is that you do a really good job of making sure all the needs
mhm,
are taken care of by a certain time. So there's a whole idea of tuck-in rounds, right?
totally.
So it sounds like it was easy for me because we only did one hospital at a time because you're doing
Yeah.
multiple. But you know, you just roll up to the ward and say, hey, listen, I'm here.
Do you
I'm
need
gonna head
anything?
home if you guys don't need anything. So what can I do for you? Any covering orders, any whatever you guys need for the night, so that I can go home
Absolutely.
and then rest. And that you said the T9 nurses were on here, so hopefully they can chime in the comments. And I think that's very helpful for them
Yeah.
just to know that you're there and aware and present.
Yeah.
And then maybe that gives them a little bit of time and what's the word? But like a little bit of a grace, I suppose, in terms of calling you.
Right. Well, and to be honest, this comes back a little bit to what you said about, being professional, being polite, being courteous, being kind, knowing your role, and, making friends with people. Because if you've alienated someone and you've insulted them in some way, or you've just kind of shown that you're not really interested in a relationship with
Mhm.
them, they're not going to have pity on you. They're not going
Exactly.
to page you at 3 a.m. They're going
Absolutely.
to page you for
Follow.
the stool softener that fell off the bar,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
because
Yeah.
you've lost an opportunity to have an ally, and we all want to take care of one another.
Yeah.
If we think that the other person respects us and
Absolutely.
treats us well, yeah.
Yeah. And work together as a team for the best of the patient,
Yeah.
right? So yeah. And so actually, here's a good question from Ibrahim here. I'll tap on it. But so now that we're both attendings, what are some staff, especially ortho, pet peeves when the resident is reviewing a case over the phone? So that's a great question. Dr. Deane, why don't you lead us off for this one?
Yeah. So I think one of the things, I think this isn't necessarily about the residents, and what they do. It's more like um, how we sometimes do this in medicine, where someone has told us something about a patient and we just take that as fact.
Yes.
And we
Totally.
reiterate something, but we actually haven't properly analyzed and used our critical thinking about
Totally.
a certain scenario that we should take a step back and do.
Yep.
So I think the only time that I'm kind of poking holes in what someone is telling me over the phone is when I think that they're repeating something that they haven't thought about. I think that's the main thing. I mean, it takes everyone practice and time to be comfortable telling a succinct, relevant history. Sometimes people ramble off, and I think that's sometimes a personality trait, but then it's also sometimes just a lack of experience.
Yes.
And knowing the pathology and therefore what's relevant. So I don't mind if someone's telling me a long-winded history and a long-winded physical exam and pertinent positives or negatives or positive and negatives that may not be relevant.
Yeah.
I don't mind that. It's more like, well, did you actually think about this? Who told you that? Did you read this? Did you look at the scan? And you're a very radiology kind of centered discipline, as are we. So we should be very well versed in reading scans and giving an opinion about the scan. And so that's one thing that I would encourage trainees and even myself, remind myself to always look at the evidence myself.
Yep.
And make an opinion myself.
No, that's a great point. And that actually kind of feeds into what I was going to say too. And it's, as much as we joke about how, you don't need to see a patient in ortho. I mean, really, the thing is, it's that whole idea that you're talking about, which is trust but verify, right? I mean, you can read it there, but just make sure that's actually true and just go. And so in ortho, we kind of always say, if you haven't seen the patient, I mean, that's the most important thing, right? Because otherwise, what are you doing? Because I mean, I could have done the same thing, right? You're just becoming that middle person like that for information. And the whole point is, as hard as it is at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., your role as a trainee is still to learn something, to educate, and to, as you mentioned, critically think, right? So it's not just to kind of survive. I mean, sometimes it is, but I mean, on top of that, hopefully you're learning something. And the other thing I was going to say too is like, we go back to knowing your level and knowing your role and the idea of asking for help. And sometimes it's more not so much a pet peeve, but concerning that if somebody hasn't called me about something or, that maybe they should have, So for me, when I start call with any of the trainees, the first thing I tell them, I said, listen, we're on call together. Call me for anything. I don't care what time it is. The only
Right.
thing is you may have to call me twice in a row because I sleep heavily. That's the only thing, right? But it's not, but you should do it, right? Because I mean, it's not a,
Yeah.
you're not trying to protect me from
No.
call. We're doing this together. I think that's the
Exactly.
biggest thing. Yeah,
Exactly. And I think having that understanding really builds trust, right? It in both ways.
absolutely.
The person knows that you're always there for them, and then you know that they're going to react appropriately when something comes in.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And like kind of almost conversely, the more that happens, the more leeway you're going to give that person and say, well, actually now, now you can,
Right.
I know you can do this, or I've taught you this, so now you can go
Yeah.
have a little more free reign out there, which is also great, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But again, sorry, again, more people are joining and kind of popping on and off. So this is Dr. Emily Deane, and my name is Dr. Adrian Huang. Dr. Deane is a otolaryngologist or ENT surgeon, currently a fellow at University of Pennsylvania, and I'm attending at University of British Columbia. We're talking about how to conquer your call shifts so you can not just survive but thrive in that call environment. And we've talked about how to prepare for call, how to manage your time and get some rest during call, and now we're kind of moving on to that post-call recovery phase. So we talked about sleeping when you can, getting outside, and my favorite part about the post-call recovery was my post-call meal, because Emily, you said very clearly, in your preparation for call, you try to avoid going out
Mm-hmm.
because that, makes you tired. And I think that's totally reasonable. But, and I did the same thing, but my reasoning was after call, I deserve something. I've lost the
Yeah.
time off, so I'll book that fancy restaurant, or I'll book that day out with friends or whoever it might be. And that was my big thing too.
Right.
Yeah. What about yourself?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the team brunch, or
Yeah, nice.
I would love kind of grabbing a bite or a coffee, kind of having a little powwow with my junior or colleague, whoever I was on with. That always felt nice. Um, I always hesitated to make firm plans with my non-medical friends because I always felt like I was going to need to cancel. There's always something, or I'd always be running late at the hospital. So normally I would take a sigh of relief with my hospital crew, and then I would plan something for the following evening or whatever,
Absolutely.
being on call. Definitely needed to have at least one social event per weekend. Otherwise,
Oh,
I felt
absolutely.
like a caged animal.
Yeah, and like we talked about earlier, this is my opportunity, anyways, of doing those things that made me feel human, right? Not just like a robot. So, getting a haircut, and you know what? Who cares if you fall asleep during a haircut? If those type of massages are pretty nice,
Right.
um, and getting your spa done, or just it was also getting like the paperwork done. There's so much paperwork in
Gosh,
residency. It was just a day to kind of
yeah.
catch up, which always felt nice. Um, excuse me, I think you mentioned something really important earlier, which is, at least in Canada, I know it's different in the United States, but in Canada, there are now very, very strict rules on how much you can work post call, or even how much
Mhm.
you're allowed to be, like, I think, stay up on call, I think. So make sure you know your provincial rules. And if you're in America, maybe some of your state rules, maybe Emily can talk a little bit more about that. But because you are very protected now in a good way.
Yeah. No, it seems, at least from what I've been exposed to thus far at Penn, it seems pretty regulated.
Excellent.
I remember one of my best friends is a neurosurgeon, and it was very much a part of the surgical culture where she trained to be on and in the OR on your post call day,
Yeah.
um, and to miss that opportunity was missed education, and it was kind of frowned upon, and I always felt that was just so backwards because they were in house, they were a lot of the time anyways, and they were up all night, and I was always amazed because I think relatively our call was a bit less
Mm.
heavy. I think in general we were a bit more well slept, but yeah, here so far in at Penn, they've been very diligent about saying no to things on their post call day,
Excellent.
taking that time to sleep. So
Yeah.
I've been positively impressed by that. I think that's really good to see.
Excellent. That's awesome. Yeah. And is that, again, I'm not sure, is that something that's happening all across America now, or is that just mostly it's just a sort
Um,
of, you know,
I think it's moving in that direction, but
excellent.
to my knowledge, I don't know how, I'm not sure how strictly it's followed everywhere, but I do think that there is, I do think that there is a push for more wellness-led working hours and working conditions for the residents. So
Yeah.
it's, I think, the right direction for sure.
So the days of you doing 72 hours on call and me doing 36 with no sleep, hopefully are over, because that's, I mean, that's
Totally,
great, right?
totally.
Yeah.
Well, and with no post-call day
We
in
almost called it. Yeah, exactly. Like, what are you doing?
what's
I
that?
remember being, I legitimately
Yeah,
remember being up and just trying to hold a tractor to keep my eyes open. It was terrible,
yeah.
right? So,
Well, I think I'm being unfair. You know, we like I told you, we had a small program, and there was only so many bodies to go around the different sites. And if you said, I I cannot, I really need to sleep, no one would ever say no.
yeah,
There was a bit of negotiation sometimes. Okay, well, we really need help with this, or like, do you think you could come for this part or whatever? So I think being that we were a small team, there was a bit more of the back and forth, but no one would ever
that's
tell you no. And so
awesome. Yeah,
I think that's different than how things used to be.
good. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I see that there is a question from Firas Firas Murray. It's a little bit off topic, but so maybe what you can do with that one is just DM myself or DM Dr. Deane. It's a question about transitioning to the US for fellowships and USMLEs. So maybe that's something you can DM us, because we're just, we're trying to talk about the call and today. So, yeah, so I mean, this is Dr. Emily Deane. She's a ear, nose, throat surgeon, currently University of Pennsylvania, and my name is Dr. Adrian Huang, and I'm at here in Vancouver talking about call. So we've talked about preparation for call, what you can do during your call shifts, and just the post-call days to kind of keep yourself feeling human and keep yourself, I guess, motivated and energetic so you can do your work, and not burn out, I think, and maintain that wellness, I think, is the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing. Um,
And be
and
pleasant,
be pleasant. Exactly. Yes, that's right.
not grumpy.
Not grumpy, because it is your loved ones who sometimes suffer, unfortunately, and that's the absolute truth, right? So yeah. So I mean, at this point, unless Dr. Dean, unless you have anything else to kind of add, I was going to open up to questions, and if you don't want to ask your questions directly on the forum, on the chat, feel free to DM myself. So I'm at Scrubbedout, and Dr. Dean, and you're at Dr. Dean. Um, and we're happy to answer questions. In the meantime, though, Emily, did you want to tell them about one more time about the CME website where they can kind of go over for a
Oh,
little
sure,
more ENT
sure.
information?
Yeah, so if anyone on the call is interested in ear, nose, and throat surgery, otolaryngology, we have a website for CME activities, entcme.org. There are a number of events being posted on a weekly basis, and there's kind of videos from previous events that are available to members. So do check that out. We're also on Instagram at ENTCME, so you can see kind of upcoming events and that kind of thing on your feed, to remind you to get on those calls. Yeah, always a nice group of people sharing information about the field, so I'm happy to be involved with it, and thanks for shouting it out.
No, for sure. And so it's all about to increase like community and that knowledge and that network that we talked about earlier, right? So the more people you know and the bigger the community, the easier life and your call shifts are going to be.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I mean, I don't see any questions. I mean, we answered a whole bunch of them. So if you missed anything and you're just tuning in, make sure you catch the replay. I'll post this on Instagram and also my YouTube, which is just it's at the real Scrubbed Out. Believe it or not, somebody took Scrubbed Out, which is kind of crazy. But anyways, but check the replay there. I'll post it here and there.
Even
And yeah,
Kendall Jenner needs to be the real Kendall Jenner.
pardon me.
Even Kendall Jenner needs to be the real Kendall
Oh,
Jenner. So
oh, that makes you
you're not
feel
alone.
so much better. Yeah,
So
perfect. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, again, feel free to DM either one of us. We're available through our socials. But yeah, no, Dr. Deane again, Dr. Emily Deane. Thank you again for coming on here. That was a great conversation. Guys, if you have any questions, please let us know. But otherwise, catch us every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific time for another topic live. And check out my website, scrubbedout.com, for the full schedule and all the details. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.
Take care.